Welcome back, listeners. You've sent in some fascinating excerpts from Carl Menger's Principles of Economics, and we're ready to take a deep dive into his ideas on value and price.
Menger's work is foundational, really groundbreaking stuff. But his ideas on value, well, they can get pretty complex.
That's where we come in, right? To help distill those key insights, we're going to tackle the age-old question. Why is water, which we need to survive, so cheap while diamonds, a mere luxury, can be so expensive?
It's a great question, one that's puzzled economists for centuries. And Menger gives us a framework to understand this. He starts by defining a good as anything that satisfies a human need. Simple enough, right?
Maybe at first glance, but I have a feeling it gets a bit more nuanced.
You're right. It's not quite that simple. Menger outlines 4 prerequisites for something to actually be considered a good in the economic sense.
Okay, let's hear them. What's the first prerequisite?
The first is pretty straightforward. There has to be a human need for the thing.
So it doesn't matter how objectively useful something might be. If no one wants it, it's not a good in this sense.
Exactly. The second prerequisite is that the thing has to have properties that allow it to actually satisfy that need. It has to be capable of doing what we want it to do.
This makes me think about the evolution of technology. Take early computers, for example. They were bulky, expensive, and only satisfied the needs of a select few. But as technology advanced, computers became smaller, cheaper, more accessible to a wider range of people. They started satisfying more needs.
That's a perfect illustration. The evolution of something, how it changes over time, can impact its ability to satisfy needs, and therefore its classification as a good. Now on to the third prerequisite. Humans need to be aware of the connection between the thing and the need.
So imagine a substance that has medicinal properties but no one knows about them. It
Uh-huh.
wouldn't be considered a good in the context of treating illness.
Precisely. Knowledge is key. It's about understanding that connection. And finally, the fourth prerequisite. We need to have command of the thing, enough control over it to actually use it to satisfy the need.
Meaning we need to be able to access it and utilize it in a way that fulfills the need. What if, say, a rare plant has the potential to cure a disease, but it grows in a dangerous, inaccessible location?
You got it. It wouldn't meet this criterion. Menger's framework really highlights that the relationship between humans and things is at the core of determining what a good truly is.
This is all really interesting. But what about less tangible things, like relationships? Does Menger consider those to be goods too?
He does. Think about a successful business. A lot of its success comes from strong relationships. Relationships with customers, suppliers, employees.
It's all connected.
Right. This whole web of actions and inactions, it contributes to the value and the success of the business. They're fulfilling the need for stability, growth, profitability.
So even intangible assets like goodwill or a brand's reputation, those could be considered goods too, since they fulfill needs related to trust and reliability.
Absolutely. Menger makes a distinction between material goods and the useful actions or even inactions of other people. But both, he says, can be categorized as goods if they meet those 4 prerequisites we just discussed.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. So where do higher order and lower order goods fit into this framework? I know that's another key concept for Menger.
He categorizes goods needed for production as higher order goods. Think raw materials, machinery, that sort of thing. And then the final goods that we consume, those are lower order goods. The important point is that the goods character of those higher order goods depends on the availability of complementary goods.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. So let's say there's a shortage of a crucial component, like the microchips that are so important in the tech sector today. That could disrupt the entire production process, right?
Exactly. Suddenly, the highly skilled workers and the very sophisticated machinery they use, well, they become momentarily useless.
Because a key piece of the puzzle is missing. Their ability to contribute to satisfying needs, their goods character, you might say, is diminished because a complementary good is missing.
You're getting it. Menger illustrated this with the example of the American Civil War. The disruption of the cotton supply, a higher order good, impacted everything down the line. The labor of the cotton mill workers, the machines in the mills. Their goods character was affected.
It all goes back to the interconnectedness of the economy, right? The idea
Yeah.
that things don't exist in isolation.
Exactly. Now, another thing Menger emphasizes is the role of uncertainty, especially the uncertainty of the future when it comes to economic decision-making.
It's true. We have to plan for our future needs without knowing exactly what those needs will be or what resources we'll have available. I think about the energy sector. Long-term planning is essential, but there are so many unpredictable factors, new technologies, changes in consumer behavior, even global events. It creates a complex web of uncertainty.
It does. It's a perfect illustration of how Menger's ideas about uncertainty apply today. He used the example of weather and its impact on farmers. It's a constant source of uncertainty.
Farmers are always dealing with the unknown. What crops to plant, when to plant them, knowing that the weather could change dramatically and affect their entire yield.
And this uncertainty isn't just limited to individual decisions. It impacts the entire structure of the economy. We have to learn to manage risk, adapt to unexpected events, and make the best decisions we can, even with incomplete information.
Which leads us to provision. Menger talks about this, right? It's the process of planning and preparing for those future needs.
Exactly. He contrasts a primitive collecting economy where people simply gather what's available with a more advanced economy that utilizes higher order goods to boost production of those consumption goods.
So instead of just picking wild berries, we cultivate orchards, we develop irrigation systems, we invest in ways to preserve what we produce to ensure a steady supply.
Exactly. It's a shift from reacting to being proactive. We start planning for the future, using higher order goods to increase production. That's a huge step in economic progress.
It reminds me of how agriculture has changed over the centuries, from those basic farming techniques to modern-day precision agriculture. The ability to plan, invest, and innovate has dramatically increased food production to feed a growing population.
A great example. By extending our planning and our provision further into the future, we create more complex systems, more efficient systems of production, and that leads to greater economic progress.
Makes sense. So let's talk about requirements and available quantities. I know Menger introduces these concepts as well.
He does. Requirements refers to how much of a good we need to satisfy our needs over a specific period of time. Available quantities is the actual amount we have at our disposal.
So let's imagine a community that needs a certain amount of water per month. That's their requirement. But the available quantity from their local sources falls short.
Exactly. That difference, that gap between what they need and what they have, that's what Menger calls scarcity. And when goods become scarce, they become economic goods, subject to all sorts of economic decision-making.
That need for decision-making drives so much. Trade, innovation, systems for allocating resources.
You got it. This concept of scarcity, the gap between what we need or want and what's available, it's at the very foundation of economic activity. It forces us to make choices, prioritize, find ways to manage those limited resources.
So this idea of scarcity, this relationship between requirements and available quantities, it's at the heart of how we value goods, according to Menger.
Absolutely. And this challenges a traditional idea, what's known as the labor theory of value, the idea that the value of something comes from the labor invested in producing it.
So what does Menger say instead?
He says value isn't inherent to the good itself. It's not about the object. Value is a judgment that individuals make. It's about how important a good is for their well-being.
Okay, that's interesting. So the same good can have different values for different people.
Precisely. And even for the same person, that value can change depending on their needs and their circumstances at any given time.
I see. So a simple glass of water, for someone dying of thirst in the desert, it's incredibly valuable. But for someone sitting at home with plenty of water, it's not as valuable.
Exactly. The value is subjective. It's not some objective property of the water itself. It's all about the relationship between the good and the person who needs it.
That makes sense. So then how does Menger explain how individuals make choices about what to value when everything is subjective?
Well, that's where his concept of marginal utility comes in.
Marginal utility.
Huh.
It's all about how we make choices in the face of scarcity, right? And how the value we place on something changes depending on how much of it we have.
You got it. It refers to how much satisfaction or usefulness we get from consuming one more unit of a good.
I think I understand. So that first slice of pizza, it brings us a lot of satisfaction. But that fifth slice, maybe not so much.
Exactly. We call this the principle of diminishing marginal utility. As we consume more, that extra satisfaction we get from each additional unit decreases.
So the value isn't about the total usefulness of all the pizza. It's about how useful that last slice is to us.
Precisely. And this helps explain how we set our priorities,
Right.
how we decide how to use our resources.
I see. So water, yes, it's essential for survival. But in many parts of the world, it's abundant. That means the marginal utility of one extra glass of water is relatively low.
Exactly. And on the flip side, diamonds, they're scarce. So each additional diamond holds a higher marginal utility, hence the higher value.
So the water and diamonds paradox. It all comes down to scarcity and marginal utility.
Menger's framework shows us that those two factors are crucial for determining value, and understanding this helps us make better economic decisions.
It encourages us to think about the value of the things we have and to consider how that value might change in different situations.
Absolutely. Recognizing that value is subjective, influenced by things like scarcity and how much we already have, that gives us a deeper understanding of our own economic behavior and what shapes the world around us. So how do prices get determined if value is subjective? It's a question Menger tackles head-on. He explains that prices in a market arise from those interactions between individual buyers and sellers. Each person is acting based on their own subjective valuations.
So even though there's no objective inherent value, prices still emerge from those individual judgments.
It's like a process of discovery, a negotiation. Buyers come to the market with their own ideas of what they're willing to pay, right? Based on how important that good is for their needs.
And sellers come to the market with their own ideas of what they're willing to accept, based on things like their costs and their own needs.
And through offers and counteroffers, a competition emerges. Buyers want the lowest price, sellers aim for the highest.
So the market price is always changing, adjusting to new information, new buyers, new sellers.
It's not about finding some perfect price. It's about finding a price that allows for those exchanges where both sides feel like they're getting a decent deal.
So the market price isn't just some random number then. It's actually reflecting the scarcity of the good and how strongly people need or want it.
You got it. And this whole process of price formation, it's vital for a market economy to work. Prices act as signals, conveying information about scarcity and value.
Interesting. So even though the valuations start out as subjective, the market mechanism uses them to objectively guide how resources get allocated.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Prices act as incentives, encouraging producers to create what's in demand and discouraging the production of things that people don't want as much.
So the system as a whole, even though it's based on all these subjective individual valuations, it can efficiently allocate resources. It reflects the aggregate of all those preferences.
Exactly. It's decentralized, reliant on each person's decisions, yet leads to pretty orderly outcomes. Now, Menger delves into use value and exchange value too. It helps us understand how goods are valued in a more advanced economy.
Okay, let's break those down. What's use value?
Use value is the direct utility of a good, how useful it is for satisfying a particular need.
So the use value of a well-made tool for a craftsman or a nutritious meal for someone who's hungry. Simple enough.
Right. But then there's exchange value. That's the value of a good in terms of what it can be traded for in the market.
So it's about its purchasing power, what you can get for it.
Exactly. And Menger points out that these two types of value, they can be quite different. Sometimes they even contradict each other.
So a vintage car, carefully restored by its owner, it might be incredibly useful to them. But because it's rare, it could have a much higher exchange value in the market. Collectors might be willing to pay a lot for it.
Perfect example. Or think about a family heirloom. It might have immense sentimental value, high use value for the family, but its exchange value might be very low.
Okay, so in a market economy, which one matters more? Use value or exchange value?
Menger argues that it's exchange value that drives most economic decisions.
Because even if something is very useful to me, I might be willing to part with it if I can get something else with a higher exchange value.
Right. You're not just thinking about how useful the good is right now, but what you could get for it, what other needs you could satisfy by trading it.
It highlights the importance of exchange in a more advanced economy. We're not just bartering one good for another. There's this whole system of indirect exchange. We trade goods for money, which can then be used to get other goods.
Exactly. And this system, driven by exchange value, expands the possibilities for satisfying all sorts of needs. It leads to specialization.
So people can focus on what they're good at, produce that, and then exchange it for money, which can then be used to get all sorts of other things.
That's it. This whole web of exchange, fueled by those individual valuations and facilitated by money, it's what makes a complex market economy work.
Fascinating. So where does money fit into all of this? What does Menger have to say about that?
Menger argues that money itself emerged organically from the needs of people who were trading. They needed more efficient ways to exchange goods.
I imagine the earliest forms of trade must have relied on barter. But that has its limits, right?
Big time. Barter relies on what we call a double coincidence of wants. You have to find someone who not only wants what you have, but also has what you want.
Like if I wanted to trade a handmade table for groceries, I'd have to find a grocer who just happened to need a table and valued it at the same level as the groceries I needed.
Exactly. It gets complicated very quickly. The inefficiency of barter would have made people search for goods that were more marketable, things that could be easily traded for many different goods.
So they started to gravitate toward goods that were in high demand, durable, divisible, and relatively scarce, a kind of proto-money.
You got it. Things like cattle, salt, or shells became common mediums of exchange. They had characteristics that made them more suitable than bartering with a huge variety of goods.
And over time, as trade routes expanded and economies became more sophisticated, precious metals like gold and silver came to dominate.
They were durable, divisible, and relatively scarce. This natural emergence of money, it's a testament to human ingenuity. We find ways to solve problems and make things more efficient.
So money wasn't created by governments. It came from the bottom up, from people's needs.
Exactly. It's a fascinating example of a complex system arising organically. People pursuing their self-interest ended up creating something that benefited everyone.
So money arises naturally from the limitations of barter. What about coinage? How did that come about?
Menger observed that coinage, by standardizing the weight and purity of metal coins, well, it made transactions so much easier.
Makes sense. People wouldn't have to weigh and assess every piece of metal. Each coin was a trustworthy representation of a specific amount of metal.
Precisely. Standardization meant lower transaction costs, more efficient trade. It cemented money's role as the lifeblood of exchange.
So Menger is giving us this foundational understanding of monetary economics then.
His work helps us see that money isn't just about pieces of metal or paper. It represents trust, shared expectations, and that enables indirect exchange.
It's not intrinsically valuable then. It gets its value from the fact that it can be used to acquire other goods.
Exactly. It's valuable because it can be exchanged for things that satisfy those more fundamental needs.
This makes me think about the debate around cryptocurrencies. Are they a form of money or just speculative assets?
That's a big question, but Menger's framework gives us a way to think about it. For something to be considered money, it needs to fulfill certain functions. It needs to be a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value.
Meaning it needs to be widely accepted for transactions, used to measure the value of other things, and hold its value over time.
Right. And if we apply that framework to cryptocurrencies, it raises some important questions. How volatile are they? How secure are they? How widely accepted are they?
His work reminds us that it doesn't matter if money is metal coins, paper bills, or digital tokens. What matters is if it can fulfill those essential functions.
Exactly. Menger's analysis of money is really valuable for understanding how it evolved, how it works, and how to evaluate these new forms of money that keep popping up.
This has been really insightful. We've covered how prices emerge from subjective valuations, the evolution of money, use value versus exchange value. All these concepts help us understand how a market economy works.
And Menger doesn't just talk theory. He's looking at real human behavior, the choices people make in a world where resources are limited.
He's looking at the individual as the driving force of the whole system.
Exactly. He challenges traditional economic thinking by focusing on that subjective nature of value.
He wants us to go beyond the models and equations and actually think about what motivates people, how they perceive things, how they make decisions in the real world.
Economics isn't just about numbers. It's about understanding people, the choices we make when things are scarce, the systems we create to manage those limited resources.
So Menger helps us understand how we got from bartering to money. What else does he highlight about this evolution?
He focuses on the ingenuity and adaptability of individuals. They were looking for solutions to the limitations of bartering, and they ended up developing this sophisticated system of exchange.
It's a reminder that even though things can be complex, they often come from very practical needs and creative solutions.
Absolutely. Menger's work on money also challenges some common misconceptions.
Like what? What kinds of misconceptions?
For instance, he argues against the idea that money's main function is to measure value or act as a store of value.
So he sees those as secondary to its role as a medium of exchange.
Exactly. The value of money, just like the value of anything else, is determined by its scarcity and how well it fulfills that need for exchange.
It's a tool, essentially, a tool to make exchange more efficient.
Precisely. His analysis of money is as relevant today as it was over a century ago. It helps us make sense of monetary systems and how money continues to evolve in our world of rapid technological advancement.
This deep dive into Menger's principles of economics has really illuminated a lot for me. His analysis of how prices form, the development of money, those concepts of use value and exchange value, it's all helped me understand how a market economy works at a deeper level.
And remember, Menger's work isn't just theoretical, it's grounded in observations of human behavior.
He's putting the individual front and center, reminding us that they are the ones driving economic activity.
Right. And his emphasis on the subjective nature of value is a powerful idea. It changes how we think about worth and value.
It reminds us that these systems are complex, dynamic. They're fueled by individuals with different preferences, limitations, and goals.
And Menger's Principles of Economics is more than just a history lesson. It's a timeless work. It offers valuable insights that are still relevant today.
It's a work that inspires new ways of thinking and challenges assumptions about how economies work.
Exactly. It's a reminder that economics is really about understanding human choices. The choices we make in the face of scarcity, the systems we create to navigate that scarcity, and how we try to improve our lives within those systems. Menger's work doesn't stop at individual behavior and market dynamics. He looks at the role of government in the economy, too.
And his insights are still relevant today, especially when we debate how much government should intervene in the market.
Menger was a strong advocate for free markets, for limiting government intervention. He really believed in the efficiency of the market, that it could allocate resources and create prosperity.
So he believed that individuals, driven by self-interest but operating within a system of property rights, would make the best economic decisions.
Exactly. He often saw government intervention as counterproductive, creating distortions, inefficiencies, things that actually prevented the market from working as well as it could.
I see. So even well-intentioned policies could backfire.
He thought so. He argued that they could often end up hurting the very people they were trying to help.
It's a good reminder to carefully consider all the potential consequences of government policies, both the good and the bad.
Absolutely. Menger was especially critical of price controls. He argued they distorted market signals. They interfered with supply and demand.
I can see how that could create problems if the price isn't allowed to fluctuate freely.
Right. He thought price controls led to shortages, black markets, even a decline in the quality of goods and services.
Because the price isn't allowed to reflect the true scarcity of the good.
Exactly. And by suppressing prices, the government removes the incentive for producers to increase supply.
So you end up with these situations where things become really hard to find or people have to turn to illegal means to get them. It's not an efficient way to allocate resources.
Exactly. Menger also argued against tariffs and other trade barriers. He thought they limited competition and raised prices for consumers, ultimately hurting economic growth.
He was a proponent of free trade then.
Very much so. He saw it as a powerful force for good, allowing countries to focus on producing what they're best at, and then benefiting from the exchange of goods and ideas across borders.
It's still a central debate today, the benefits of free trade versus protectionist policies.
It is. Menger's work really highlights the importance of thinking through those unintended consequences, and it reminds us that there are often market-based solutions to economic problems.
So he was a proponent of letting market forces do their thing. It's about understanding the potential and the limits of government intervention.
That's a good way to put it. Now, another area where Menger's insights are valuable is in understanding economic progress. He saw progress not as something linear or preordained, but as a process, something that emerges from human ingenuity.
So it's about constantly trying to find better ways to do things, to solve problems.
He saw it as a process of discovery, where people are always seeking new and improved ways to produce things, to deliver services, to meet those ever-changing needs.
And I know he placed a strong emphasis on the role of entrepreneurs in this process.
He did. He saw entrepreneurs as individuals who are alert to opportunities, willing to take risks, and capable of putting resources together to create something new.
So it's not just about big companies or government planning, it's about those individual innovators.
Right. He believed that a free market, with its emphasis on competition and incentives, that was the best environment for entrepreneurs to thrive, to unleash that creative potential.
It makes sense. If you create an environment where people are rewarded for taking risks and coming up with new ideas, you're going to see a lot more innovation.
Exactly. Menger's ideas about entrepreneurship really challenge how we think about progress.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Carl Menger's Principles of Economics. We've explored how prices form from those subjective valuations, the emergence of money, the concepts of use value and exchange value, and the crucial role of entrepreneurs in driving progress.
His emphasis on individual choice, limited government, and the power of those market forces, those ideas are still shaping economic thought today.
His work encourages us to be critical thinkers, to question assumptions, and to remember that economic systems are constantly evolving, driven by the choices of individuals.
Menger's Principles of Economics is a powerful reminder that economics is, at its core, about people. It's a study of human choices, the systems we create to navigate scarcity, and how we strive to improve our lives. It challenges us to look beyond the numbers and grapple with the complexities of human behavior.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of Carl Menger's ideas as much as we have. He offers a timeless perspective that can help us navigate the economic complexities of our world, from understanding the forces that shape our everyday lives to pondering the big questions about the role of government and the potential for a more prosperous future. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.